Hey, Gary Glenn, Ted Nugent here reporting for duty, sir, with a big thank you and gonzo prayers coming your way from the Nugent family for a strengthened spirit. And we know that your attitude and your spirit and your energy is strengthened by God. And we are with you all the way. Thank you for serving God, family, country, Constitution, Bill of Rights, Ten Commandments, Golden Rule, the Declaration of Independence, Gary. We celebrate independence every day because of warriors like you. From the Nugents, especially this guitar player, thank you, salute, God bless, Godspeed.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Rescue Michigan live stream where we have, as you can tell, a very special panel tonight. So welcome to everybody in the chat. Happy 4th of July weekend, everybody. There is a lot of news we could be talking about tonight on our regular Sunday stream. Most of that we are going to postpone until Wednesday because we've got something else to talk about tonight. A lot happened in Lansing. I know people have questions about what was in 4474, the thought crimes bill. Where is that now? It did not pass the Senate. Who voted against the budget bill and why and what was in it? There is a lot to talk about. That is all going to have to wait until our stream on Wednesday night. But yes, Daniel Lawless says this is an all-star panel. And it certainly is. And some of you might recognize some of the folks on this panel. I know most of them, but I don't think anybody but Gary himself will know everybody. But let me start by saying, for those who don't know who Gary Glenn was and why we're doing this show all about him tonight, Gary Glenn was someone who I connected with in the right to work fight we had in Michigan that began in 2010. Gary was, at that point, a far more seasoned political operative than I was, but I had interacted with a lot of the people from the National Right to Work Committee through the Ron Paul presidential campaigns, got to very quickly know him. I ended up being the consultant for his campaign for state representative and working with him in the state house. And what I think you'll find everybody here knows about Gary Glenn is that Gary was one of the absolute most fearless and effective politicians in his communications and in always going on the attack, always taking down his opponents, never backing down. And he has actually been fighting since 2016, prostate cancer. And a few weeks ago, when shortly before Daniel Ellsberg, the leaker of the Pentagon Papers, passed away, Scott Ritter, who was a guest on our show a few months ago now, had mentioned that he wanted to do a live tribute to Daniel Ellsberg before he passed away to reflect upon his life and give him the opportunity to see it and know how many people out there are supporting him and praying for him. So Gary Glenn, I got to visit him last Friday, but it's been a long battle with prostate cancer. So we've got a lot of guests on tonight. So I'm pleased. I'll go around and I'll let most of you introduce yourselves for the most part, because I know some of you better than others. So we have, starting with Rod Beck, who knew Gary from when he was in Idaho he was an activist in Idaho for many years. You may know Steve Johnson in the top right there. He was a colleague of Gary's in the state house. He served 3 terms in the state house. We have Tom McMillan, who is a member of the Michigan State Board of Education, knows Gary for a very long time. We have former House Speaker himself, Tom Leonard, who, as Speaker, appointed Gary Glenn chair of the Energy Committee. And there on the right, we have my political mentor, Mike Rothfeld, who, if you guys like the work I'm doing in Michigan, thank Mike. And he is first of all, the founder and president of the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. He trains thousands and thousands of activists. He's also the founder, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, the founder of the National Association for Gun Rights, the founder of the National Pro-Life Alliance, and I think many other groups as well. So he's shaking his head, so I've got something wrong. And your mic is muted. Oh, there we go. Maybe. You're muted, Mike. You'll have to correct me when you get the issue fixed. I don't know what's going on, but we can't hear you. And then Ben Adams and Laird Maxwell also are colleagues of Gary from Idaho. I'll let you gentlemen introduce yourselves, because I've only gotten to meet you through organizing this event. So Rod, why don't we start with you, since you're to my right?
All right. Well, hey, thanks, Adam, for putting this all together. I've known Gary Glenn since 1984. I first was a young man wanting to be in the Idaho State Senate, and I wanted to be on the ballot with Ronald Reagan. As it turned out, I was able to get on the ballot with Ronald Reagan his last election in 1984, and Gary helped me do that. However, it was sort of backdoor, because there was somebody else that Gary had recruited to run for that spot. And so it looked like we may have a primary. And Gary reached in and figured out a way to get the other guy to run for the House instead. So we had a good run. I'm glad to see Laird. Laird Maxwell was Gary's campaign manager when he ran for Congress in Idaho, down there in the corner. Hi, Laird. How you doing?
Good to hear you. Good to hear you.
Yes.
Good to see all of you.
I've known.
Yeah,
Gary.
we're the Idaho Mafia.
Yeah, you live in Arizona now.
Well, I know I got run out. I'd have been thrown in jail if I'd have stayed there much longer.
Anyway, I've had a good solid relationship with Gary. We were at the convention in 2016 when we nominated President Donald Trump. He was, of course, there as a different supporter of Ted Cruz, as I recall. But we had a good time there, good meet up there, and he just recovered from his first round with the prostate cancer. And now, as it turns out, I hold one of the jobs that Gary Glenn used to have. He used to be a county commissioner in Ada County, and now I'm a county commissioner in Ada County. So I'm sort of sitting in his shoes right now in Ada County.
Excellent. Before I go to Steve Johnson, I know Tom McMillan and Tom Leonard may have to leave at some point, so why don't we go to them first so they can at least introduce themselves in case they have to go. Let me start with Tom Leonard because Tom was the speaker, for crying out loud. How you doing, Tom?
Hey, I am doing wonderful. Thank you for having me. And, I've known Gary for several years. I'm trying to think. I think the first time that we met was probably about 15 years ago. Time flies. I think Gary was a candidate for the U.S. Senate. And if anybody that knows Gary, you know that Gary's a night owl. And we went to the Mitchell's Fish Market. It was the two of us and two other friends. And I think we were there till about 3 a.m. eating bread pudding and just talking about old political stories. And before you know it, he ran for the state house. I worked hard to help him get elected. And then once he came in, as you mentioned, when I became speaker, made him the energy chair. And God bless him. He was an amazing chair. There were times he would certainly, how do I want to say this, as speaker, give me a headache because of some of the things he would say publicly when he was attacking the utilities. But he was a great chair. He was for free market principles, and probably most importantly, really helped me manage the caucus and get some great things done. So a great friend, a great ally, and hopefully if I'm still on later, I'll be able to tell the story about him and Hannah and the miracle that the good Lord worked out with Janelle and I and with Gary in his cancer. It was probably the best story I had during my entire time in the House of Representatives.
Wonderful. And yeah, a big part of the later part of Gary's political career was going to battle with the 800-pound gorilla in Lansing, that is the utility monopoly. So I'm sure we'll touch on that as well. Tom McMillan, how about you?
Yeah, I met Gary at a state committee meeting. It was being held in Midland, and he was working for a ballot proposal or had just come off of it. It was in '99, I think. I was mayor of Auburn Hills, and
the universal tuition tax credit, is that right?
What's that?
The universal tuition tax credit?
That's what. Yeah, I think he was working on that. Yeah, and that's what brought him to Michigan. And it was soon after that he had started with AFA Michigan, and there, we connected soon after that. After I met him, we I guess I won't go into all of it, but we ended up going. Being outspent 8 or 10 to 1, we got involved with special rights ordinances, Ferndale and Royal Oak, and we were outspent at least 10 to 1. We came in on the Ferndale like 3 weeks before the election, 4 weeks, and we got $5,000 from my church, I think, and we ended up defeating them. Defeating that. Gary is and was a master at strategy, working the press. When I was state rep for 6 years, he was my go-to person I'd always call when I knew I was going to have a tough interview on some, typically family values. I'd call him before I'd call back the press, and he would really ground me. And okay, Tom, he helped me cut to the chase. This is the principle we're standing on. And I obviously agreed, but at the time he would be the one that would really kind of focus me. And then, he is a master at media and finding out how to work the media back when they were actually the media. I'm not sure what they are now, but yeah, he is great wisdom and has done incredible amounts. I mean, when he and I were kind of the ones that started the marriage amendment. I was a county commissioner in Oakland County, and passed the first resolution supporting it. And he just knew how to really push the envelope. Like, people didn't want to. He would get out there. He would actually be effective, and then all of a sudden, the big guns would have to follow him. So he would be the one that could really be the change maker.
Yeah. Oh, I see we have another guest coming on. Tom Barrett. How you doing, Tom?
Okay. How is everybody?
Good. For those in the audience, Tom Barrett was another colleague of Gary's in the state house,
Hey,
and
Tom.
and a fantastic candidate who really should be in Washington right now, but we're working on something for that. So, Tom, thank you for joining us. We're actually just still doing introductions.
Oh, great.
So if you want, I know your time might be limited as well. So if you want to just give us a few words of how you knew Gary.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm down in Oklahoma visiting some family down here for the 4th of July holiday, but
Excellent.
wanted to pop on while I could. Adam invited me. I'm glad you told me about this. Really, I remember coming into the state house 9 years ago now, and Gary was also elected in the same freshman class that I was. And I told him when I saw him recently, I said, Gary, you really were a leading edge example for a lot of other legislators. You were willing to ask the tough questions and really dig at things in a way that allowed the rest of us to kind of gain some confidence with that, to not always be the one, asking the hard questions or challenging some of the things that other people may have taken for granted. And I remember particularly on our energy debate, Gary was the leading person on the side of free market, energy choice, and the other things that, as conservatives, we really take as important values. And he just took that upon himself to make that the issue that he was going to dig into and really be the leading expert on from the conservative standpoint. And I remember sitting in committee, I told him the way the structure in the state house works when you're in committees is when you go to take a vote on something, they start with the chairman and then come down the line sequentially to the other members, and the vice chair goes next. I was like number 13 or something down the list. So it always gave me a little bit of time to think about what I was going to do after, Gary went ahead of me. And, once he jumped off the ledge, it made it a little bit easier for the rest of us to jump off the ledge and follow him, I suppose. But just a great example, and somebody that I really look up to and still think so much about that time we had together in the state legislature and the impact that he had on our state.
Great. Thank you, Tom. All right. We've done 3 in a row from Michigan. So Mike, I'll go to you if your microphone's back on again. Go ahead. We're not hearing you, Mike. All right. Well, Mike, if you have any backup microphone or something, or maybe it's one of those headsets that's got 3 prongs, you got to really ram it all the way into your PC. That might do the trick. We could hear you fine before the show started.
Can you hear me
There
now?
you go.
Yep. I hear you.
Yep.
You're back.
I'm in.
All right.
Bam.
All right.
Okay. So my background with Gary is a little different from those that have spoke so far. I'm a right to work guy from 30 freaking some years back. And I didn't know Gary back when I was at National Right to Work, but I knew of Gary. Gary, Mark Mix, Kirk Shelley, Guy Short. These were like the lions of the field guys, the killers, tough guys. And I heard about him. I don't know that I met him back then. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Not sure. But when I really next knew of Gary, it was in the late 90s, when I and some others were beginning to fight what we now know is the homosexual radicals, which back then most people thought, yeah, who cares? But Gary saw it. I saw it. A few others saw it. The iron teeth of the state, a true attempt to undermine what is true and good and beautiful. And he was with AFA. And I just read about him and it's like, I know that guy. He's a right to work snot like me. And he's, I hope we can say this year, he's kicking ass and he's not apologizing for it. And he took a ton of arrows. And time passed, and Gary did what Gary did. I did what I did. And he came to some of my schools for the foundation. And of course, as a field guy and as a fellow protege of Huck Walther, both of us are, he had a worldview and a tactical view that matched my own. Then he gets in the legislature. Fine, that's good. That's a good thing for us. Some of you know where this is going to go. Some of you don't. Adam probably does. Then he gets into leadership. And it needs to be established, especially if Gary's listening, that in this particular story, Gary was completely in the wrong. That needs to be established on the front end. My group is the National Association for Gun Rights. I built it with many others helping, especially the president, Dudley Brown. And we're looking for a vote. And Gary knows the score. He's a right-to-work guy. We want to put a bunch of rhinos, weak Republicans on record. If they vote wrong, we're coming after them in the primary. Tough crap if they have a problem. And Gary's job is to keep us away. And we go back and forth. And it was a fun mix of the usual crap we get out of leadership, of why we can't do this. Now's not right time. You're hurting the majority, blah, 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 which we don't care about. And this sort of wink and a nod, right to work field guy competition things like, I know what's going on here. And your guys are not tough enough to take me on. I can take you on. And it was actually at a certain subtle level hilarious. In the end, we didn't get our vote. Gary, because of your stupid term limits, left the house. We got Annette. That's a good thing. She's a lovely lady. But this, all joking aside, with Gary, I hope and pray that I see him in eternity. And when he gets there, probably before me, he hears, "Well done, good and faithful servant," because I believe that's what Gary has been, a good and faithful servant on the hard things. Didn't always get it right. None of us do. He was always there 100%. And he has been a real role model for a lot of people. And I think I'm one of them. So if he sees this, that's heartfelt. If he doesn't, now you guys know. Thank you, Adam.
Very well said, Mike. Thank you so much. All right, we're still on introduction, so let's go next to Steve Johnson. And of course, we got a lot more to do tonight. So it's going to be free form after that. And I've got a few clips and some things to show people, but we'll just let it go as it is. So anyway, Steve.
Yeah, so I think I'd heard about Gary a number of times, but I didn't meet him till 2016 when I was running for state house. And the thing I want to know, so many people don't realize the real debates in the legislature don't happen on the House floor. They happen in the caucus room. And Gary was so good at that. He could get up, he could give a speech in that caucus room. He knew his stuff, and he could turn people's minds there. And that's where the real decisions were made. And it was just so amazing how he was willing to fight. It still is willing to fight the utilities, the Chamber of Commerce if he had to. I mean, all these big groups that had so much power and that everyone else seemed to be afraid to go after in Lansing. Gary wasn't afraid to go after him, but it's more than that. He was effective. Anyone can, be willing to go after the biggest target out there, but if you're not effective, who cares? Gary was effective at it. And I just wish people could see how he could turn a room inside the caucus room. All of a sudden, you had people that wanted to vote one way, and now they're scared to vote against Gary because they know the people are going to be against him if they do that. They know that Gary knew the argument. He was a conservative warrior, and they're afraid to go against him. I think, sadly, I think our society throws around the word hero far too often. It's almost diminished the term. But I would say Gary truly is a political hero of mine. I mean, he was just so good at fighting for conservative values.
Yeah, and Gary did pay the price too for going after the monopolies, because they did spend, I think, more than $1 million intervening in that race when he ran for state senate. That was political payback, and it was amazing. Frankly, I think, shameful what the legislature didn't turn around and say, you know what, you're openly attacking one of our members. This is over the line. But That's the way it goes in the capitals. Anyway, we've got some other folks we need to introduce here. Ben Adams, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing good. So I guess quick introduction. I'm now a state senator in Idaho. I did one term in the House of Representatives before moving over. And maybe this goes to show that Gary has no quit in him, because many of you know him from years ago, but I didn't meet him until I think end of 2018, 2019. And when he met me, I was a Marine Corps combat veteran that was struggling. I had lost a lot of my confidence in my gut, which is important. And we met, and he was very easy to talk to, and we very quickly realized that our principles aligned. And you know, he was very encouraging to me at a point in my life when I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. This is a different side of Gary, I guess. I mean, we can all talk about, he's obviously politically an animal, but he helped me in a lot of ways other than politics. And then he was the one who really encouraged me to take that step forward in running for office, which I said no to 3 times. So it did take a lot of encouragement, but I owe a lot not only in my political career, but personally, he was, I believe that God used him to reinstill that confidence in me that I can trust what I'm seeing and and I can trust my gut on a lot of things. And so I always appreciate that.
Yeah, that's one thing I think a lot of conservatives struggle with, is when they're being beaten up for expressing their views, their first instinct is to retreat, to apologize, to equivocate. And Gary's first instinct always was double down, always go after them. So, and we'll show some examples of that in just a few minutes. Laird, how about you? How do you know Gary?
Well, I go way back, old school. Gary was really his own campaign manager in his run for the United States Congress against Mike Crapo. I was just there helping him along every step I could, but we had a ball. Had a lot of fun on that campaign. Quick little story, we're sitting at the Bonneville, it's a county in Idaho over at Idaho Falls, a Bonneville GOP shindig, and I'm sitting next to former Senator Steve Sims. And I say, Steve, listen to what Gary's going to say. And he walks up on the podium and he says, what Idaho needs to do is to send to Washington, D.C. another good lawyer. And Sims starts cracking up to beat hell. The thing is Mike Crapo was a good lawyer. And so, Glenn comes back, he says, Maxwell, that was a great line. He got it from me. And Sims was just rolling on the floor with this. But that shows you that not only was he tougher than nails, but he has a wonderful sense of humor.
He really does.
Another little quick one was during that campaign, we're driving across the state, and we get to thinking about some good radio ads, and one of them kind of got us in a little trouble, but it sure got a lot of ad play. Something about these lawyers from Washington D. or from New York City. We're all banding up or helping his opponent Mike Crapo, because Crapo is a lawyer, and so we came up with this ad, and it says, what the hell was it? It says, help me with it. Gary and I are also cancer buddies, and so I've had a lot of radiation in my head, so I'm about as dumb as Joe Biden sometimes. But anyway, we said, we got more lawyers coming in here from New York City, and we went, New York City, get a rope. We cut the ad, and anyway, that line was a paste picante sauce, and oh hell, you can't be using that crap in our saying, in your evil advertising, and so everybody in the world played that ad over and over again. So the ad got a lot of play. I think we rented, I don't know, for about $300 or something. Anyway, two little quick ones. That's where we come from. Known Gary for a long time.
It is a fine line when you do incendiary ads between having them be on one hand brutally effective, but on the other hand having them backfire on you. And Gary always had exactly that right pitch. I'm going to.
You had to have humor. I'm sorry about that, but you had to have a little humor in it in order to make it stick. And we carried that through many, many campaigns.
Yeah, I actually have a clip that really gives a great example of this. I'm going to play the clip. This is from when Gary was the chairman of the Energy Committee, and there was a bill that came up that was going to be a deal for Consumers Energy, which is one of the two big monopoly utilities in Michigan, of course, but it was a deal that involved his own district because there was Dow Chemical and Hemlock Semiconductor were involved. These are big players. Anyway, here's the clip from Gary, and then we'll show you what happens in the aftermath. Here we go. There's a short glitch at the beginning, but then it goes right into it. Here we go.
We have a company that is. So the first thing we're going to take up is House Bill 5902, but before we do, I want to make a statement. I've had questions from committee members about what I want on this bill, but let me tell you first what I would like. What I would like to do is shoot the terrorists. I had a consumers lobbyist sit in my office last week and tell me that if they were not treated with sufficient respect, or if their brand was pushed around in committee, they would pull the plug on this legislation. That kind of arrogance is bred of monopoly power. They get their 90% guarantee of market share. They get their 10% guaranteed profit every year, no matter what it costs ratepayers or our economy. I have a colleague who knows more than most of us what the words honor and duty mean, who believes that I may be abandoning him on the field of battle in the face of the enemy. So what I'd like to do is shoot the terrorists, but I am not willing to shoot through the hostages to hit the terrorist.
So you can imagine what the blowback from that was. So here, in fact, I'll pull it up for you. Here's exactly what happened after that. This article comes out in the Detroit News. Lawmaker under fire after likening utility a terrorist he'd like to shoot. And of course, it's all about this. But here's the full quote. So first, they have all these comments from these lobbyists, and you've got you've got the Chamber of Commerce guy saying, this is inappropriate. There are times when people may disagree, but lawmakers need to refrain from this. And the Consumers Energy spokeswoman says, we were disappointed in the rhetoric he's used against individuals at our company. And here, this is a perfect example of Gary not only not backing down, but doubling down. So here's what Gary says in response. He says, I understand and respect the Chamber's obligation to respond on behalf of a prominent dues-paying member, which is this is a backhanded slap at the Chamber of Commerce, saying you only care about the big players. Anytime the CEO of Consumers Energy wants to appear before the House Energy Policy Committee to apologize for her corporate lobbyist's threat to scud legislation affecting 1,500 jobs in the region I represent, I will certainly accommodate her. So it goes right from, no, actually, you owe me an apology. That's the way Gary would always operate. And he has that wit. Like, he didn't need to think about what his angle was going to be. That was his go-to move every time. So, yeah. And there were so many examples of stuff like that too. Yeah, I'm trying to think. What else do I want to show? Well, let me go back. Let me tell you a bit about where I really got to know Gary, because I knew him tangentially through the right to work battle, but in 2013, I ended up going to Washington for a year, and I kind of stepped away from Michigan politics. And those of you who are not from Michigan don't know this story, but this guy named Kerry Bentivoglio became what the media called the accidental congressman. He, the incumbent got thrown off the ballot for having forged his ballot access documents, and suddenly Kerry Bentivoglio was the only guy on the ballot. We hoped it was going to be a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington story. Turned out to be a Homer Simpson Goes to Washington story, and the guy was a complete nutcase. Meant well, but every day in his office was just crazy. So after about a year, the writing's on the wall. I'm like, I got to get out of here. And there's an unspoken rule in Washington. You never hire out of some other out of a colleague's office, so you couldn't get a job in another member's office. So after a year, I'm ready to just pack it up and go back to Michigan. And I can't send out an email saying, help, help, my boss is crazy, I got to go back, because, you know, you throw your boss under the bus, no one's going to ever hire you again. So I wrote this Rainbows and Unicorns story, and I just want to get back to the grassroots and reconnect to Michigan and get involved in all the great fights you guys are making. And I hear so much great things, and I can't be in Washington on the sidelines. And Gary calls me up and he says, that letter was so well written, will you be my campaign manager? Because Gary recognized that there's nothing more valuable in politics than being able to write effectively. And of course, Gary himself was a practitioner of that. And then when he hired me into his campaign, he says, listen, Adam, I know how to do everything that you do, but I know that I can't do it myself because I'm the candidate. And I know I need to allow myself to be managed by my staff. And that's something I've never heard a politician say ever since. And God, I wish they did. But that's what he did. We had a relationship that entire campaign where he allowed me to be the campaign consultant, and for him to be, as Mike would say, the piece of flesh that goes out as the product and knocks on the doors. But there'd be moments when the opportunity came when we could get together and do some kind of operation. The best one was when his primary opponent, I know this was a mistake his staff made, but his staff made the mistake of identifying him as a member of the Foreign Legion when he wasn't a veteran. And Gary caught it, and he's like, this is gold. We're using it. And we used it to the nth degree. And it just absolutely brutalized the guy. Because Gary was competing then with what we called the 800-pound gorilla in his district, which is Dow Chemicals headquarters. And their guy was Gary Glenn's opponent. We had to beat them. And they spent more money, but Gary knocked on doors harder. And Gary's messaging is what came through and ultimately allowed him to beat him. But I don't know. I'm not here to filibuster. If you guys have stories you want to share, I'm going to look for some photos I've got from the campaign trail and some of the attacks we did. Go ahead,
Tom, did you have one? I'd love to tell my story.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and I tell folks, this is probably, or is, the most memorable and incredible story that I've have from my 6 years in the legislature. But as many of you probably know the story with Janelle and I, we were told several years ago that we'd never have children. And we had tried, and we started the adoption process. And just before we were going to put a very large down payment on that, we found out that Janelle was pregnant. And we had not told anybody. And several weeks before, we found out that Gary was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. My facts might be a little bit off, but my understanding is I think Gary was just given, likely months to live. And God bless him. He started going through the treatment. He started going through chemo. And I will tell you, there's so many politicians that, they're a much different person out in public than they are behind closed doors. And that wasn't Gary Glenn. What you saw is what you got. And he was just an incredible God-fearing Christian person behind closed doors. So one night, it was one of those late night sessions, and Gary was in his second, third, fourth round of treatment. And the man never missed a vote, but most importantly, he never complained. You never heard him complain about being sick, never heard him complain about needing to get out of there. And one night late at night, I was looking over around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I could tell it was just rough. He was doubled over on his desk. He was lying down. We still had some votes to go. And I walked over and I kind of put my arm around him, and I said, "Hey buddy, how you doing?" And he said, "Tom," he says, "I got to tell you," he says, I'm not going to make it. He says, there's no doubt. He said, I'm not going to make this. And I said, "Well, Gary," I said, "I got to tell you something." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "I want to fill you in on a little miracle that happened to me just in the past couple of weeks. Very few people know. We haven't made it public." And he knew about the issue that Janelle and I had gone through, not being able to have children. And I told him that she was pregnant. And I said, "Gary," I said, "I got to tell you something, buddy." I said, "I know in my heart," I said, "the good Lord is going to get you through this treatment." And I said, "And when Janelle has that baby, we're going to bring her or him onto the House floor, and we're going to take a miracle photo with you and with that baby that we were not supposed to have, and you still being here, after going through these treatments." And it was Hannah was born on September 14th of 2016, and it was just a few days later, brought her to that House floor, and we took that miracle photo with Gary. And God bless him, a guy that was only supposed to have 6 or 7 months to live. here we are 8 years later. The good Lord's still blessing him. He's still blessing us. And Hannah has now taken, I think, 3 or 4 miracle photos with Gary. And now we got Thomas, and he just took a miracle photo with Gary a few weeks ago. So as I said, the good Lord, he does miracles all the time. He's been good to all of us. And that's probably the most memorable story I have during my time in the House of Representatives, just that miracle that he performed with us at the same time.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And Adam, I would just say I served on the board of AFA Michigan with Gary for many years back, I think soon after in 2000. But he was always, like you said, very, very effective. He knew how to spend a dollar very well. He just, obviously a man with incredible integrity. And nationally, I know he was known and he would go, I can't think of the name of Arlington Group. That's what it was. He would go to the groups where James Dobson, Gary Bauer, he would be in this room of 25 to 30 of the top heavy hitters in the country. And he would be, as I understand from other people, the one really moving that room to action. And so he, it wasn't just Idaho and Michigan. He had huge impact throughout this country that many of us probably have no idea. I'd love to get some of these other national figures on. I think they could probably tell you what that room was like with Gary Glenn in it. I also want to mention the ladies with Stop Common Core in Michigan asked me to make sure it was clear that he was a warrior and a leader for the cause of fighting back against Common Core while he was in the legislature. And he crafted the legislation that they pushed. And I think, that came out of the Senate, I believe, that they took it and came out of the Senate. Oh, there's Michelle, one of the people that was involved. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well.
I'll take the comment down so I'm not blocking people's faces here. But of course, you can always watch this video again later and pause the video to see Michelle's comment. Gary, I think he's always the guy who's looking for the next opportunity battle. And when he got to Lansing, Tom, do you know? Did he ask you to be put on energy, or how did that come about? Because I think what ended up happening is Gary just got on the energy committee, and by virtue of seeing what was happening there, decided his next flight was going to be with the utilities.
Well, it was funny, and God bless him. We all know, Gary's aggressiveness. Sometimes, we absolutely love it. And sometimes, as you said, you'd be scratching your head saying, Gary, what in the world are you doing here? And he and we had a very good conversation, and he supported me early on for speaker. And when he did, it was really a breaking moment in my, leadership race, because it brought a lot of credibility with the conservatives in the caucus. And I think we picked up 5 or 6 votes right out of the gate, and then a lot of the incoming freshmen. But he and I had a real good heart-to-heart one night. It's funny you asked that question. And I had made a commitment that I was not going to make any promises to anybody for any type of leadership vote. I wanted to walk in with a clear mind. And Gary was very clear what he wanted to do. And I did not give him a commitment. But what I said to him was, I said, Gary, listen, you're one of my dearest friends. You've been very loyal. And it is time that we have somebody, a free market conservative like you, chairing the Energy Committee. I said, well, I'm not going to commit to you. I said, rest assured, you will be taken care of when I'm speaker. And I think he knew what I meant at that time. And I said, but Gary, again, I can't make any commitments, and I need you to be quiet about this. About 3 days later, I can't remember if it was in the Detroit News or the Free Press, what it was. I get a link sent to me via text, and they said, what in the world is this? I thought you didn't make commitments. And Gary went and spoke to a group of conservatives. I don't know who it was. And he's like, let me tell you something. I've got Tom Leonard's commitment. When I'm the next energy chair, and I can't remember exactly what he said. So immediately I have all these people calling me saying, I didn't think you made commitments. And I had to call Gary, and he says, oh yeah, maybe I got a little ahead of myself there. I said, Gary, please just calm down, man. You're going to be taken care of. But again, it was just that tenacity is just what made him so effective. So that was it. He and we had a good heart-to-heart one night. He was very loyal. He and I were great friends. But not to mention, I knew he would do a great job as the energy chair, and that's how it came to being. And certainly, I got a lot of phone calls from the powers that be that were trying to stop that from happening. But we knew that Gary was the right person. And then while he was there, there were many times, not just the clip that you played. I'd get a lot of phone calls saying, "What in the world are you doing having this guy as energy chair?" And I'd have to. This is the right guy, and he did an incredible job, and I don't regret that appointment at all.
Yeah, and I just realized I had my history wrong, because I just realized you were the speaker in Gary's second term, and it was Kevin Cotter that put him on as vice chair in his first term. And for those who didn't see this, the chairman of the Energy Committee in that first term was Eric Nesbitt, the guy who's now in the state Senate, the one who cast that secret vote for the Democrats' budget when he voted publicly to vote with the Republicans and vote no. That little sleazeball. He was the chair of the, no offense to anyone that might know Eric personally. He was the one who was the chairman over Gary in that first term. And Gary decided in his first term, while Nesbitt was trying to ram through this energy monopoly bill, Gary's going to oppose him every step of the way. And Gary, I remember him saying to me, Nesbitt must be absolutely furious that there's never been a situation where the chairman of a committee is getting vetoed by his vice chair. But that's the position that I've put him in now.
Well, and if Adam, if you want to know some of the impact that Gary had as a freshman rep being vice chair of that committee, I remember vividly. There were several that just said, "Listen, there's no way we're gonna buckle on the 10% choice. We have to have that. If we're even going to consider voting for that." And I will tell you, if it wasn't for Gary Glenn, that 10% choice would not have been preserved. That guy, again, he was tenacious and he fought hard as vice chair of that committee.
One thing, he knew how to find the right little anecdotes too. I'll tell that in a moment. But Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I apologize. I'm going to have to get off in a second, but sure. Gary was actually awarded Freshman of the Year by MERS. For those of you not from Michigan or not hyper political, they're the real inside Lansing. They track all the bills. They attend all the committee hearings. They write a daily update of all the goings on in Lansing, sometimes with a little bit of the personality drama and everything else included. And they select a freshman legislator of the year in each new class. And that was Gary Glenn. And they attribute it to his work on the Energy Committee, because people thought these bills were just going to get really greased right through. And after a year and a half went by and the bills hadn't passed, a lot of that was attributed to the work that Gary had done in the committee. He was effective in many ways and in many regards.
Yeah. The story I was gonna tell, and this goes to Gary's media savvy and always being able to look for an angle to exploit. And I remember what had happened was there was a committee hearing in the Energy Committee, and someone came to testify. It was a superintendent of, I want to say, Holly schools. And she said, we're on electric choice. And if we lose our electric choice, I got to lay off 5 teachers. And Gary just clicked and knew that's exactly the angle to go by, and threw in a bill immediately saying every school should be able to get electric choice. This is pro school. This is pro teacher. This is pro taxpayers. And that became the angle he used to leverage and preserve electric choice, because he had those instincts. He was always looking for what's the personal angle that's going to sell this to the media, and he would always do that to the nth degree. And actually, now I'll put up on my screen here briefly. This is the attack ad we did in his campaign when we had the opponent that accidentally put out a campaign piece saying that he was a member of the Foreign Legion, or the Midland, not the Foreign Legion, the American Legion. So the first side of the piece is this, and it's got all of Gary's credentials in the military on it here, being the chair of the chapter of Sons and Daughters of Pearl Harbor Survivors, photo of him with his father who survived Pearl Harbor, photo of him in Fort Sill. Then there is side 2. This was side 2. And what we actually did, because the Midland Daily News, usually they would not give Gary as much positive coverage. But we figured out that they would publish every letter that someone sent in. So they didn't give us a good story. So we got the director of the Michigan American Legion district commander to write in the letter for him, and then just quote from the Midland Daily News for that one. So we used this to the nth degree in the campaign. And, it was It was a mistake the opponent made, but we used it. Gary was someone who always believed that you don't let your opponent live down their mistakes. If you're in it to win it, you owe it to your donors to do what it takes. And so he went ahead and used it, and we knew it imprinted because we would hear from people about, at the doors about that. All right, I've got more, but who else has some stories? I don't want to be the only one telling some stories about Gary tonight.
I don't know much. Who knows the story about Charlton Heston? Because, just so
Yes.
they know the reach of Gary Glenn. I mean, didn't he go to Charlton Heston's house or?
Well, yeah, he did. What happened is the National Right to Work Committee were taking polls in Idaho, and because when we passed the Right to Work bill in Idaho, and it got vetoed by the Democrat governor, and we had just enough votes, thanks to Gary's prowess in convincing or actually writing an anonymous plan to the state Supreme Court on the reapportionment. We had 2/3 to get the bill passed and to override the governor's veto. Gary, they had a press conference in the governor's office for some reason. I don't remember the details, and Gary thought he could show up at the press conference, and he had of course, a camera crew with him to show up at this press conference, and they kicked him out of the governor's office. Well, Gary, in his inimical wisdom, went out right outside the governor's office, held his own press conference, denouncing the governor for what he was trying to do. Gary was just a great. Of course, I know Gary from 1984. So, and I knew he had a great story because he and I kept in touch on his exploits in Michigan. But Gary had a very long reach, and incidentally, you might not realize it, but he met the AFA head while he was in Idaho campaigning for me. And then when he moved to Michigan, he got hooked. Hey, I'm going to start the AFA of Michigan. So his reach was great, and we just loved the exploits of Gary Glenn in Idaho. And he made his mark mostly by defeating Republicans in a Republican primary that wouldn't support right to work until we finally got the 2/3.
Well, we'll have to talk more about that and the Charlton Heston ad in just a moment. But really briefly, I know Ben Adams just messaged me that he's got to put his kids to bed soon. So Ben, if there's something you wanted to say before you got to go.
Yeah, real quick. Something that I've always appreciated about Gary is the depth of his faith. I didn't know him before the cancer. I've the whole time I've ever known him, he's had been battling with cancer, but his his depth has always been reassuring to me. It's somewhere we're really connected. And when I first was when he was trying to convince me to run for the first time, I kept telling him no, and finally I said, look, there's no open seats and I'm not going to run against an incumbent. And within 24 hours, Gary Collins, the guy that was in the seat that I ended up taking, resigned. And I called Gary and said, Gary, you're not going to believe this. And he goes, let me guess, Providence has struck. And everything I learned politically, I've learned from Gary. I didn't really have a lot of political background outside, but he invested a lot in me, and I really appreciate that. He took a little bit of the Marine in me and took a little bit of the believer in me and put it all together, and it's been an absolute blessing having Gary in my life, and I just want to make sure I said that.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to meet you, Ben. If you're able to come back on later, I don't know how long we're going to go, but that link is good. You can come on or leave anytime if you need to.
Okay.
And I also want to go to Tom Leonard because he said he's got to go soon too. So if there's anything more time you wanted to add, you're
no.
welcome to.
I think I said what I had to say, and I think Ben just summed it up best. Just Gary's just been an incredible blessing to so many of us, and a man of faith, and we just love him.
Great, thanks, guys.
I can complete that story on Charlton Heston if you'd like.
Yes, please do. Please do.
What's happening is, and Mike might know this if you're one of the warriors of the early days of the Right to Work Committee, is we'd passed the legislation, and the union had gone out and put a referendum on the ballot to not allow it to become law. And so Gary was in charge of the referendum to get the vote of the Idaho people to maintain the right to work law. Well, as you all know, the Right to Work Committee, they're really poll centric. They love taking these polls. And at a certain point in time, they looked at the polls and they said, well, Gary, I don't think we can win this in Idaho. And so they wanted to pull the money from the campaign. Gary wasn't about to have that. He wasn't about to have that. And so he went, well, we'll just raise the money ourselves. That's when he approached Charlton Heston. and when he put Charlton Heston's ad on the paper or in the TV, it moved the polls dramatically. And it was Gary that went to Charlton and said, Charlton, you move people. You ought to get involved. And that's when he became involved in the National Rifle Association. When he did get more involved, it was because of that experience that he had in Idaho, and it was because of Gary's tenacity that got him into the race to start out with. Notwithstanding the National Right to Work Committee not wanting him to raise the money, he went out and raised it himself.
Yeah. And then Charlton Heston did a radio ad for Gary Glenn, I think when he was running for county commission or something in Idaho. But
Yep.
we used it when he was running for representative in Michigan, too. I think I might have that clip. Let me see if I can find it here. Hold on. Give me one moment. Let's see if I can find the audio.
I can kind of fill in a little bit more on probably that clip you're going to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he was running against Crapo for the U.S. Congress, he sent a crew down to Charlton Heston's home, and Charlton came out and said, Idaho needs leaders like Gary Glenn. Is that the one? And so he probably carried that.
So. Here,
yeah.
I found a clip that's just labeled radio ad. Let me see if this is the one. I'm not sure. Let's see. See what happens if I play it. Hold on, it's uploading right now. Let's see here. Okay, let's see what we get.
Pride of St. Helen, Michigan. Oscar-winning actor, former president, National Rifle Association, and the Screen Actors Guild, AFL-CIO. But here's what the late Charlton Heston said about the principle behind Michigan's new Freedom to Work law.
I've played men like Tom Jefferson, Lincoln, heroes defending American freedom. There are Americans still carrying on that fight where citizens want the right to work without being forced to join a union. As a former union president, I believe Americans should be free to choose.
And Heston said this after working with Gary Glenn, now Republican candidate for state representative.
Today, America needs leaders like Gary Glenn. I stood with Gary before to defend our freedoms. He tells the truth, and he fights for it. I trust Gary Glenn to fight for all of us.
Charlton Heston, Gary Glenn, freedom fighters from Michigan.
I support Gary Glenn because I know him to be an honest man and a good man.
Paid by Glenn for representative. Online at garyglenn.us. The pride of St. Helen, Michigan.
Okay, so it started to loop there. Rod or Laird, do you know, was the word Idaho perhaps edited out of that ad someplace?
May have been.
It sounds like I think I heard something there. There was a little bit of a blip.
Or Ada County Commission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he named a kid after
he did
after Charlton Heston. Two of them, I think.
Well,
yeah.
Heston, Hunter, Reagan.
Yeah. Right.
And
he really admired Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston had a soft spot in his heart for him. I mean, how in the heck do you get, it'd be like walking up to, some famous actor and trying to give them hey, why don't you come help me out with my little project here in Idaho? He had a way. He had a real good way about him. Has a good way.
It's going to kill me that I'm blanking on the names of his other two kids, but they'll hopefully come to me.
Yeah, one thing you have to say about Gary, change the topic a little bit, but he loved the Boise State Broncos. And he is absolutely nuts about them. I ended up moving down to Arizona, and Boise State was in the Fiesta Bowl. And it was the famous Fiesta Bowl where some guy went and, after Boise State came back from a victory, and Gary came out, stayed with us, and it was a wonderful time for him. Hell, we all had seats at different locations, so it was the best we could do at the time. But yeah, he loved the Broncos.
Yeah. I want to give Mike Rothfeld an opportunity to chat for a moment because he said he's got a bolt at the top of the hour too. And I would have Mike on this show any day to talk about things because he is my political mentor, folks. I met Mike. Well, I didn't meet him, but I first interacted with Mike when he was the lecturer at the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership's first post Ron Paul 2008 campaign training, and ended up working with Mike in various capacities since then, with Campaign for Liberty, where he was a contractor, I believe, and then the Ron Paul 2012 campaign. And I was involved at one point, I think, building a scheduling tool for faculty schools and other things. And during that period, and Mike, you're on. You looks like your software is on mute, so you got to unmute yourself. But I'll let you have the rest of the time because I know you got to go. Mike, you see that little mute button on the bottom left there? You gotta uncheck that box there, buddy. I'm not sure what to tell you, man. At the very bottom of your screen, there's a mute button. You got to unpress it. You got to press it again. Bottom left of the screen, there's a mute. There you go.
Oh, I did it again.
You pressed it twice. Press it one more time. There you go. And we still don't hear you. All right.
Oh, we don't hear him.
Yeah. One of these days, Mike, get another microphone. We'll have you back on for a program just to talk about things. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for the kind words. They really do mean a lot to me, and I'm sure they mean a lot to Gary as well. Thanks for coming on, brother. We really appreciate it.
Oh.
We still don't hear you. If you want to type something in the chat, I can read it to you.
Hey, Adam, I just wanted to say, one of the things that Gary taught me about strategy, and maybe this will help others that are watching, but
yes.
He would get the press to say something, to put in, in the media or in an article what he wanted to say. And then he would take that article and send it to all the other media. And he says, that's how those are the kind of things that you learn. And I've used it many times. And so he had all this wisdom, and he has all this wisdom. And I, he's impacted, the number of elections and campaigns and people who saw what they do. I'm sure it's just incredible. And so I too, if he's watching this, pray for him often. I saw him. We took a trip a year ago for a week down to Mississippi to AFA National, and they gave him an award. And then we went and stopped at Shiloh. He saw where his grandpa or great great grandpa fought at the Battle of Shiloh. So he's a dear friend, and I know that, like has been said, I trust someday I'll see him, in all of eternity. Hopefully I'll see him before, while he's still here on earth. I just saw him a few weeks ago with Tom Leonard, and it was a great time. So his spirit is still strong right now. I can tell you, we text from time to time. He's still fighting the fight, and he's still running the race set before him. And like was said, I think he will hear good, well done, good and faithful servant. So I appreciate you putting this on, and I too need to. My parents need to get out of here too.
Fair enough. It is 10 o'clock on a Sunday evening, and I thank you guys all for coming on such short notice too. I want to play another clip from Gary. This is just an example again of his class act messaging. This is not a hostile interview, though. This is with the House Republican caucus. But, and Steve, you know this from working in the House. You have these caucus staffers that give you the talking points for you, and Gary just throw them in the garbage and do everything all by himself. And here's just one interview he gave, just completely off the cuff. And this is just him talking about electric choice.
Hello, I'm John Perry, and I'm joined by Representative Gary Glenn. Representative, in your first year here in the Michigan House of Representatives, you've had a significant focus on jobs and looking for ways to bring additional jobs, foster new jobs here in Michigan, looking, as it were, for that next big thing. As we move in to 2016, what do you see as that next big thing?
Well, I hope I hear from the governor in the State of the State address that there is a commitment to having a more competitive energy market in Michigan. I was very much involved in helping make Michigan a right-to-work state. I think that made Michigan more attractive for new business and industry, new plant site locations, new job creation. In fact, Michigan is now #1 in the nation in manufacturing job creation over the last several years. So what a dramatic turnaround. But we shouldn't finish. I mean, we should not fail to finish the job. I mean, we need to find out what the next big thing is in making Michigan even more attractive for more job creation. And I believe, as Vice Chairman of the House Energy Policy Committee, that the next big thing is to make sure Michigan has competitive energy rates. We have the highest electricity costs in the Midwest, the 11th highest in the nation. So we are not competitive when it comes to electricity. And for some of our major manufacturers, like the Big Three or Dow Chemical, that's the single biggest expense in their business operations is the cost of electricity. So I'm hopeful the governor will indicate some commitment to having competitive bidding and to having an expanded electricity choice, both of which we know as a matter of free market principle, if people are free to choose and you have competing providers who have to compete against each other for your business, that's what gives us a better product at a better price. We know that works in every other area of our economy. I'm confident, and based on a year's worth of experience with the Energy Committee now, I know that will also work when it comes to the provision of electricity to all the major manufacturers, and it'll result in lower electricity rates, not just for our commercial and industrial users, but for homeowners as well.
Just a masterclass of just being able to memorize the talkers and just belt them out one after the next, and the framing. It's so, it's so clever. It's not big evil utility company. That's all. This is what's in the ratepayers' interest, and we'll talk about the schools and all the rest. But when Gary wanted to throw punches, man, he was good at doing that too. Here's an ad we made. This was in the general cycle, and I'm gonna have to, let's see, maybe I can move us to the side so this will be easier to read, and maybe I can make this full screen. Let's see. This is the front piece that we did when the attacks we did on the opponent. And Gary, as Mike, who was with us earlier, and as I personally practice, negative ads work. And this was one of the ads that we did. The opponent, she was on this show, and for the most part, she wasn't the organizer of Occupy Wall Street Midland. But in this video on community television, we got the car on with her right there. So we let her have it. And this ad we dropped, I think, less than 24 hours after this Facebook post. It says here in October 17, 2014, Facebook post. So this is a Facebook post citing 2 weeks before Election Day. So you can imagine how quickly we had to get this one turned around. And so we got this, he and I worked on this ad together. We got the exact frame where she looked the worst. I digitally enhanced her eyebrow piercings, which you can't maybe see on the screen, but you can in the print version. Tying her to Occupy Wall Street, tying her this Wisconsin Democrats leaving the state. And then there's the bipartisan angle. And this is classic Gary Glenn right here. If Joan Broush thinks such partisan obstruction tactics were appropriate in Wisconsin, it's reasonable to conclude she thinks such tactics would be appropriate in Lansing anytime Democrats don't get their way. No matter which party, such partisan extremism and obstruction tactics are wrong. So that was side 1. And then let me see if I got side 2 here handy. Hold on.
Adam, I'm going to jump in real quick where you're doing that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Got to hop out, but one quick story. I talked about the importance of the caucus room and the speeches there, and I'm thinking of one back in my first term on the income tax cut. And a lot of people don't realize the speaker never puts up a vote that they know will fail. It's just sort of precedent. You don't do that. It looks bad. It makes you look weak, or we're not. And so we wanted to cut the income tax. We had complete Republican so-called control in Michigan. You'd think we could cut taxes. And there's these 12 people in the Republican caucus that were refusing to vote for it. And obviously the Democrats wouldn't vote for it.
The dirty dozen.
So normally what would happen is you just it wouldn't happen. And then those 12 people would go back to their districts and they claim to be conservative because there'd never be a vote on record showing that they actually voted against the tax cut.
Yeah.
Gary got up. He gave a great speech in favor of the bill. But then he ended it with, and you know what? Even if this is going to fail, we should still put it up on the board and we should still vote for it. So that way I can still tell my constituents that I support a tax cut.
And Tom Leonard did it.
And he did. And it happened. But what really important was it wasn't about Gary being able to tell his constituents he voted for a tax cut, because everyone knew Gary supported the tax cut. That was never in doubt.
Yeah.
What was the bad was we could expose those 12, and a number of them tried to go run for Senate that next year, and they lost in Republican primaries.
I think of the 12 of them, I think 7 of them didn't come back after that next cycle. I think one of them got primaried and lost, Dave Maturin.
Yep.
3 or 4 of them, no, 5 or 6 of them ran for state senate and got beat either in the primary or the general. Let me think. Chris Affendulis, Daniela Garcia. Who were the others? Do you remember? I can't remember their names now.
Yeah, Mike McCready was one of them.
McCready,
Brett Roberts lost to Tom Barrett.
Roberts, that's right. Yep.
So
yeah, the dirty.
It wasn't. It was just he was so good, and Tom Leonard was instrumental in that too. But so good
Absolutely.
at saying we're not just going to allow these 12 people to withhold the vote from ever happening. We're going to put it on the board, and we're going to make sure they pay for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Gary's the man.
Yeah.
I think you need to understand that he learned that he perfected that technique in Idaho. When he first got here, he was about an 21-year-old kid. He went out and he had friends in the Idaho legislature. They knew they would lose the right to work vote, but he would force them to do a vote by his friends in the legislature, and then he'd go and take them out the next year or the next cycle. And that's why the Republicans didn't like him that well, because a lot of their buddies were defeated by Gary Glenn because he got them to vote against the right to work in Idaho. That worked, but by the end of the time, nobody dared vote against it.
Yeah, Gary Glenn was one of the original rhino hunters.
Oh yeah, it was great.
And people in Michigan, all over the place now. Everybody talks about bagging the rhinos and all the rest of this. People don't understand. That was a technique that was refined with the National Right to Work Committee. That became their program in state after state after state. And Gary Glenn was doing that in Idaho decades ago. And that was the model they used in state after state.
Late 70s, all through the 80s.
Yeah,
he had got a lot of Republican hides.
That's the model that a lot of these other groups that Mike Rothfeld is training are employing, and that's the model that my organization is employing too. You know, we always name names. We're always going after these people, and it's going to be time one of these days to start recruiting some more candidates. Looks like we lost Steve. Maybe he'll be coming back. I don't know, but I've got maybe a couple more things, a couple more clips to share, but maybe we should wrap this show up too. We've been going for more than an hour, so.
Sure.
But this video or this image, this is the backside of that Joan Broush ad. I remember that this line here in the middle was Gary's. Not many politicians admit they'll raise our taxes. Liberal Democrat Joan Broush says she'll raise all of them, and we used the Vote Smart survey, which no candidate should ever fill out for exactly this reason, but there it was, and that's what we did. And he won by a fairly comfortable margin in the general election. The primary is a lot more difficult, but we managed to do it. We beat the Midland Mafia, at least that year we did. So
good.
I just want to relate one thing from that last clip.
Yeah,
where Gary was being interviewed. If you noticed, the interviewer said, "Gary, tell me a little bit about this energy thing. You're a new guy." And the guy never said anything after that because Gary just absolutely dominated a stream of conscious. And we kind of learned that from old George Hansen in Idaho. They'd say, "George Hansen, congressman from Idaho, how you been doing? Have you even had a chance to mow your lawn?" "No, I haven't had a chance to mow lawn because IRS has been fighting, blah, blah, blah." And then they said, "Well, we have to go to a break now, George." And then come back and he said, "Well, I was just talking about that damn IRS." And away we go. And no one ever asked George or Gary but one question. And it was a wonderful technique.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, Rod.
Oh, yeah.
It's tough to do that. It's tough. You know, you got to be completely inculcated with that information so you can just put it out in a logical order so the guy won't ask you another question instead of interrupting you, like, Sean Hannity and all these bastards. They just, man. They try busting up your train of thought. It's good technique, really good technique,
It takes practice. And it took me, I worked kind of behind the scenes for some years before I came out with my own group, and it was the result of having done this enough, long enough that you start to get an knack for it. But Gary it was a talent of his to do that. I had to actually think about what I write, but Gary would just pop it right off the top of his head.
Oh yeah,
a lot of fun.
Yep.
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 And that's the thing about it was a lot of fun too. It wasn't just all, you know, there were some tough times. Don't get me wrong, but it was just way too much. There's nothing better than making liberals and squirm. You know, they come out, they try to put you into Chinese communist struggle sessions. Now, why are you not a white supremacist? You know, and all that kind of crap. And it's so fun to just turn the tables on them and just run them into the ground because they're crazy people. And if you understand their mentality, you can have a lot of fun with some crazy people. You know, it's like throwing a dog a stick. You know, they go chase it every time.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, hey.
Okay. Adios, amigos. Thank you so much for doing this. We love you, Gary.
From Annette saying she needs your contact information. Rod, do me a favor and put Annette and Laird in touch, would you?
I beg your pardon?
Would you put Laird in touch with Annette? Because
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, you brought him on our show tonight, and so we got to meet him through you. And I guess Annette needs his contact information as well.
Well, he goes back with Gary as far as I do.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all
right, nice to be here with you. I'll put
Thank you.
Your contact information, Gary. Yeah.
Thanks, Rod.
Yeah.
All right.
So everyone, and by the way, Rod and Laird, don't hang up just yet. After we end the stream, we'll say our proper goodbyes. It was great to have you guys on tonight. And thanks for all the great work that you're doing in Idaho, or I guess now Arizona.
Yeah, he's Arizona. Prescott.
Yeah.
Prescott like biscuit.
So anyway, so everyone, it's been great to recap Gary's career, and I'm sure there's even things we missed. You know, we talked a little
this
bit.
could go on
about
for
his work with
5
the American
hours.
Family Association, and Gary's just been a lifelong fighter for so many things. So just everybody keep Gary in your prayers. He's, I think, plan is to him's going into hospice on Wednesday. So we want to wish him well. And that he continues to preserve his health for as long as he can. And we want to just say how sincerely thankful we are for everything he's done in Michigan, in Idaho, in really in other parts of the United States too. I mean, Gary's inspired, and you guys have just heard this tonight, how many people he's inspired, how many lives he's touched, and what a difference he has truly made in our political system. You know, a lot of people get involved in politics, discover how difficult it is, and how frustrating it can be. And before you know it, they've either burned out, sold out, or just walked away. And Gary was, more than anything else, I think I remember actually Mike Shirkey saying this, that Gary was your quintessential happy warrior. He loved the fight and he enjoyed it. And it was his passion. It was not a burden, it was a passion. And everybody out there today, those of you watching, fighting to save our country, fighting to save our state, I hope that Gary's story inspires you to his worldview, to his attitude, to his diligence and work ethic, and to love the fight and to relish it, and to do what Gary Glenn would do, which is to go out there and cause pain for our political opponents, and to lead a movement and build more and do more. So let's take a moment and again thank Gary for everything. Wish him well, and keep him in your prayers. So thanks everybody for joining us. Rod, Laird, it's great to meet you. And as always, guys, thanks for all you do for liberty. We will be back on Wednesday to talk about all the crazy stuff that happened in Michigan and nationally. We've got some Supreme Court decisions to look at. We've got some bills and votes to look at, and a whole lot more. So we'll see you all then when we have our regular panel back on. So thanks guys for joining us. Rod, Laird, it's great meeting you. You guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, and don't hang up just yet, because we'll say our goodbyes after we go off there. Thanks for all you guys do for liberty. Until